Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root, from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site that covers your Arizona Cardinals. Recording with my co-host, Seth Cox, from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, as we record episode 640, the post-Super Bowl episode that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the Super Bowl, the Eagles championship win, what we can learn. So there was stuff we can learn about that from the Cardinals, and then we will look at, in particular, some Eagles free agents that we might think makes sense, and whether they'll be targets or not. So, Seth, I guess first and foremost, and we were talking about it before the show, this wasn't a particularly enjoyable Super Bowl. This for me, this was like a reminder of late 90s, early 2000s Super Bowls, which oftentimes were not competitive, especially in the 90s. They were not competitive. I remember those when I was a teenager.
No, it was a tough watch, man. I mean, it was not fun to watch. You saw a lot of bad football on both sides for a little bit, and then the Eagles just ended up overwhelming the Chiefs. The Chiefs looked, and by the way, Andy Reid is a Hall of Fame level coach, one of the probably inching into the top 5 in terms of coaching all time. But man, he did not have a good game plan for this one. The Eagles look ill prepared, and just a buddy of mine, Billy M on X, talked about it a couple weeks ago. Kind of taking a shot at Ryan Day when he was doing it, but kind of mentioning it like talent can overcome coaching when the talent is that abundant. And he was talking about Ohio State winning the national championship, and he said, oh, by the way, when the Eagles win the Super Bowl, like, and that's kind of what it was, right? Like, we saw just an overwhelming group of talent, the end of a regime, basically, kind of the last great gasp from this particular set of Eagles. And it's very similar to the year that they won in 2017, because
the Eagles are now officially three-peat breakers, because they were up against the Patriots, who were set to win their 3rd in a row. Nick Foles foiled that. They did it again. Well, and we look at that Super Bowl, the number of games that we talked about the Cardinals. This was almost one of those things, is that they started badly offensively, and it steamrolled, because they went, 1 first down, punt, 3 and out, interception, and they were lucky enough that in the first 4 possessions it was only 10-0, because they had gotten the punt. They forced the punt on the first drive and gotten the interception, but then the rest of the Chiefs picked up 1 first down in the entire first half. And we've seen like things steamroll, like for the Cardinals, and that's exactly what happened, is that things just got out of hand, and they never got, and had they been able to score once in the first half, I think this game goes wildly different. But the Eagles then just poured it on. And while, in my case, I believed the Chiefs would win, this sort of game didn't completely surprise me, because Philly has the talent to do it. I just didn't expect the Chiefs to look so completely overmatched from the very start of the game. It's like Philly's defensive line, well, like that makeshift offensive line that the Chiefs have been running with, it finally, like, that house of cards fell very, very poorly. And like the other time that we saw Patrick Mahomes lose in the Super Bowl, it was because Tampa Bay was able to get consistent pressure. And that's what they did, is that Mahomes didn't have time to do anything. Like the dancing he does in the pocket to be able to step up. He had no time. He wasn't able to step up and break free of the pocket. And it was just a masterful performance on both sides of the ball by the Eagles.
Well, and I think there's a twofold thing to this, Jess. I think the first thing is part of the reason we didn't expect this, or it was a little surprising to see the blowout, is because the Eagles have been so inconsistent all year. You and I were kind of talking about it beforehand, right? They win a game in Brazil against the Packers, then they go and lose to the Atlanta Falcons. Then they win a 15-12 game against the New Orleans Saints, who were terrible, as we know, at the end of the season. And then they get blown out by Tampa Bay, right? And then you kind of just look at their season, right? 2016 over the Browns, but then they blow out the Giants and the Bengals. Then they barely beat the Jaguars. Then they blow out the Cowboys, hang on against the Commanders, blow out the Rams, hang on to beat the Ravens, and then they almost get upset, remember, in week 14 by the Panthers. And everybody's just kind of like, what is this team? Like, it makes no sense. And then obviously game one of the postseason, they kind of just toy with Green Bay, but then they struggle with the Rams and never really put it away. And it takes, the weather and all these outside things. And you're like, all right, what is this team? Like, why are they? But they came in, they were focused, and they were ready. And then on the flip side for the Chiefs, you just saw, like you said, it was a house of cards all year. And I don't want people to take this the wrong way, but you just saw that this was held together by, one, Patrick Mahomes' greatness, and then kind of duct tape and glue. I mean, we're talking about,
they had a great defense all year, and their defense honestly didn't like the game plan of slow down Saquon Barkley. They did it.
Right.
He had 57 yards the entire game, but it was offensively where they were just surviving, because this year the Chiefs were very good defensively and did just enough offensively. And late in the year, it looked like they were going to kind of get on a roll, but the inconsistency at receiver, after Rashee Rice went down, and Worthy being a rookie, and Travis Kelce not looking like Travis Kelce of years past. And I don't know if that was it for him, and then the offensive line just piecemeal. And so they knew how to win games late, but it looks like they just ran out of magic. And I kept waiting, like, is this going to be the match? And part of it was just tongue in cheek. I'm like, okay, they're down 24-0. Is this going to be Mahomes is matching? And it just didn't happen because the offense couldn't do anything. He was under too much pressure. He was hit. Well, he was sacked 6 times. And then 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, hit 11 times. He was under pressure constantly.
Well, not just that, Jess, but remember, the Eagles didn't have to blitz, and that was always that's the worst part of it, right? And that was always the same way that Brady lost, right? Like, we always talk about this. The way that Brady lost
teams
was teams that could get pressure with 4 and drop 7 and wreak havoc on the back end because the front end was doing so much work. And we saw the same thing here. It's the way you beat any team, or the way you win consistently. And that's kind of the whole moral of the story, right, Jess, is that you've got a group that had done a nice job. They've been together for a while. But it was always going to come to this end because it's just the reality of the NFL. You can't keep everybody. I mean, you can, but guys have to sacrifice, and there's no one that's going to sacrifice their financial stability for the rest of their life to win another. I mean, they got one, and we saw that with Tyreek Hill, right? Like Tyreek Hill wanted to maximize his financial, gains in his career, and he was like, I got a Super Bowl. Like now it's about me. And
Yeah.
that's how it goes. And so the Eagles are gonna, feel that they've done a good job of preparing, and we'll talk about, the guys that they'll be losing, but they've done as good of a job as they can to prepare, but it's still not going to be the same. I mean, you're still losing guys that were difference makers, and you're replacing them with guys that you hope can be difference makers. Like that's how it goes. But then there's also the reality and a conversation we're going to have shortly of and this is the conversation we have about Georgia, Bama, now Ohio State defensive players all the time, right, Jess? Are they that good, or are they a product of a system that allows them to be great? And so that's what we're going to have to figure out this offseason, because we've already seen it, man. The clamoring, right? The clamoring for a couple of these guys already is very, very strong.
Yes. I will say one thing that bodes well for Kansas City. The game that Xavier Worthy had, he's going to be good. If he stays healthy, he's going to be good.
Yeah, and I just completely spaced it. That was my other point. Like, let's be honest. Kansas City had a bunch of names on offense, but they didn't really have a lot of talent.
No, DeAndre Hopkins, apparently washed. Hollywood Brown. I mean, you can't we loved what Hollywood had the potential for. Guess what? Hollywood isn't very Hollywood, I guess, in terms of the bright lights. He's inconsistent. Kelsey is on his last legs. We'll see if he comes back. But yeah, and so their top playmakers, like the running back committee that they had, ended up being barfy.
Well, and
Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco combined for 16 yards.
And everybody's been saying, right? And I shouldn't say everybody, but intelligent Chiefs fans have been saying, like, this isn't how you want it to look, right? Like these guys, we love what Kareem Hunt came in and did this year. We love what Isaiah Pacheco has done in the past, but this just wasn't that. And it's wild to me that fans, and I get it. I mean, they're fans. They were like, oh no, it's fine. Because like my buddies that are Chiefs fans, and I said this the other day, like my buddies that are Chiefs fans, that's been one of their things the whole time. They're like, it's, it's Mahomes. Like Mahomes has to make magic. And if it doesn't happen, there's just not enough talent on offense. And we saw that come to fruition.
Yeah.
Like it's wild to think that a team that's been to 3 straight Super Bowls, won the 2 previous, that a guy that's never not played in the AFC Championship since he started playing or started as a quarterback in the NFL, and people are saying like, oh, he's got to do it again by himself. And he almost did it. I mean, I know the game wasn't close, but the fact that they were there again with this group is absurd, because just from a talent perspective, they were just so overmatched most of the season.
Yeah. Coming up next on the Rise of Senior podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. Now let's turn the corner and talk about what we can learn for the Cardinals. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise of Senior podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. I think the first thing when we saw the Eagles win the Super Bowl is, what can we take away from that? And the Cardinals, in a way, if you're kind of looking at things, there's some things like, what are they missing? And you can point to 2 things in particular about how these 2 rosters are put together. The 2 things that the Eagles that stood out in that Super Bowl, the 2 things that absolutely stood out was the pass rush efficiency, the pressure, and the playmaking, like the turnovers. And you pointed out the stat that there had never been a Super Bowl champion that had forced fewer than 3 turnovers in the playoffs, and that continued to be the case. I looked at some of the numbers. So the Cardinals were bottom half of the league, bottom third of the league in sacks this year, and the turnovers, they forced 17 takeaways the entire year. We've had this discussion on the show several times. The Eagles had 13 takeaways in 4 preseason games, and so
postseason,
yeah, postseason games, and so you look at 2 things. Is that the 2 things that really separated the Eagles from the Cardinals, and on a large scale, is the fact the Eagles could affect opposing quarterbacks and not have to do fancy things to do it, and 2, they took the ball away, and those are the 2 things that the Cardinals' scrappy defense just didn't do. They didn't get to the quarterback without adding extra pressure, and they didn't take the ball away. And so while they did have some effectiveness in the second half of the year, they were a better defense if they weren't terrible, but they were a survival defensive team because they couldn't make plays. So they couldn't get sacks, and they couldn't take the ball away. And so I think if you look at the kind of the offense skill set, like if you look at the Eagles and you look at the Cardinals side by side offensively, you kind of get like the Eagles have an elite running back, yes. The Cardinals have a great running back in James Conner. The receiving core, you obviously Phillies is better than the Cardinals, but you kind of see what the Cardinals are building there. Both have great tight ends. The offensive line of the Eagles this year, their offensive line is fantastic. The Cardinals didn't get bad offensive line play. And then their quarterback, I'm still going to say this, even though Jalen Hurts has accomplished more in his career, he is more game managery than Kyler Murray. I think Kyler Murray is a more talented quarterback, a better quarterback. He just hasn't accomplished as much. And so, but if you look at the way that the Eagles built this roster, you can kind of go with the Cardinals, because is Kyler Murray the standalone star, like one of the elite 4, like he's going to carry the team like Joe Burrow or Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes? I think we've reached the point where while he can do that, he isn't that guy consistently. And so you need to build a team more like how the Eagles did. And how did they do it? They put together a great offensive line, and then defensively they have elite play. They just have they've got too many great guys on the defensive line that you can handle, and they make plays on the back end. And I think that's what's the next step for the Cardinals. I think offensively they just need to shore up that offensive line a little bit. I think they need the development from their playmakers offensively, but they need, and what they didn't have this year is that their defensive line just ran out of bodies. They need bodies that are playmakers up front, and they need better playmaking on the back end. And if they're getting pressure, guess what's going to happen? If they're making more of an impact on the pass rush, if they're getting more hits, more pressures, more sacks, you know what's 100% is going to happen on the back end? They're going to get turnovers, because that's what happens when you have a dynamic pass rush.
Right. And and to your point, Jess, like we're talking about an Eagles roster that, one of the things that we've complained about, and again, we don't want this to be misconstrued. But again, the way the Cardinals have built, and I know they're trying to change it, but the way the Cardinals have built is just such a fool's errand. It starts with, and again, leader, fantastic. Their highest and best defensive player being a safety, and that's again not a shot at Buddha, but the fact that their best defensive player is a safety typically means you have a bad defense. And not because you can't have a great safety like an Ed Reed or Troy Polamalu that takes your defense to the next level, but when you're talking about your best defensive player being a safety and you have a bottom, third defense in the NFL, that's what an issue is. And you look at the Eagles, and where they've invested. And their inside linebackers, Zach Bond was a free agent pickup this year. Nakobe Dean was a 3rd round pick. CJ Gardner Johnson, their starting safety, was a free agent that they re-signed after letting him go. Right? They let him go after the 22 Super Bowl, and then brought him back this year on a very, kind of low end deal. Reed Blankenship was a undrafted free agent. Like those are the guys that lead the team in tackles, but they're not their best players. And don't get me wrong, obviously seeing Bond make an all-pro first team, he's a very talented player and he had a great year, but their best players are all these guys up front, right? And that's where they've invested, and that's where they've put their money and their assets. And that's one of the things that you and I we've talked about over and over. And I think it's happening finally, which is what, we're excited about, but we have to be a little patient with it too, right? Like we have to understand that they didn't get all these guys in one offseason. Josh Sweat, they drafted in 2018. And by the way, Josh Sweat was a 4th round pick and worked out. You look at Milton Williams, he was a 3rd round pick. But he's a rotational guy with Jordan Davis, who's a 1st round pick, with Jalen Carter, who's a 1st round. Like they invest over and over and over at these same positions, top 100 picks. And I talked about it and wrote about it the other day. The Cardinals, prior to Monty Ossenfort, they just didn't. That wasn't what, and we can rehash this over and over, and I'm sure we will this offseason. But for whatever reason, Heim was always chasing ghosts, right? Like he was always trying to find his Darrell Washington, Carlos Dansby team again. Like the fact that the Cardinals never, and I genuinely mean never, took a top 2 round cornerback after Patrick Peterson until Byron Murphy in 8 draft years apart is absurd. Like it's one of the most absurd things you can think about, that a team just never took a corner in the top 2 rounds. I mean, their highest corner taken was Jamel Fleming, who was a bust. Like it was just absurd use. Like you go back to all of them, right? You look at it. Robert Kimdiche was the only defensive lineman that they took in the first 2 rounds. The only one in Steve Keim's entire draft era. Like that again is absurd. You had a guy like Rodney Gunter who worked out for a while, right? That was a good 4th round pick, but he should have been the Milton Williams type, right?
Yes.
That he's rotating in with these 2 1st round studs and he's able to come in fresh and really make an impact. But instead it was like, okay, Rodney, you're a starter as a 4th round rookie. Like that was just a mismanagement. So now fast forward, they're doing it. But we also have to acknowledge that they're so far behind in it that it makes it really tough. And again, you have a guy, Dante Stills, perfect example. You have a guy that looks like a diamond in the rough, right? Probably not a high-end starter, but he looks like a guy, 8 sacks in 2 seasons, 6th round pick, looks like a guy that can be a rotational contributor in the NFL. Now you need Darius Robinson. Now you need, a pick or 2 from the 2025 draft to make it so Dante Stills isn't your best defensive lineman. And again, this is no shot at Dante Stills, but when Dante Stills is your best defensive lineman, you are doing a terrible job. And that's what they have to overcome. And I think they're like I said, it's great to see because I feel like it's coming. I feel like that's been the focus the first two drafts is stacking like premium positions along the offensive and defensive line and at corner. But they're going to have to continue to do it because unlike quarterback, right, where there's just one, unlike running back where there's just one, you need, I mean, for the Cardinals, apparently you need like 12 defensive linemen. But, for most teams, you need, 5 or 6 that can come in and make an impact.
Yeah.
And that's what they failed to do. And that's what the blueprint is, because you mentioned it with Kansas City. They're going to have to reset because they've tried, but Kingsley Suamaitai looks like a bust. I mean, he's a first-year guy, but when you're going to DJ Humphries and then benching DJ Humphries to kick a guard out to left tackle and then playing, Frank Caliendo's little brother or whoever it was, I don't know, at left guard, like it's a bad look.
Oh, and then you've got Trey Smith. Like Trey Smith might leave.
Right. And so like you said, they're going to have to reset that. And part of it is hitting on those picks. It's not just picking guys at those positions. It's hitting on them. But at least we're seeing Monty Ossenfort put that, take the bites of the apple. Because we talked about it too before the show, Jess. One of the most important things in drafting is luck. Health is obviously the biggest of that luck, right? But luck. I mean, we talked about it. They drafted Andre Dillard in 2021, I want to say, to be the team's franchise left tackle to take over. I don't even know if he's still in the league. He might be. He's definitely not with the Eagles.
Yeah, he signed with someone last offseason and ended up being not a starter, I'm pretty sure.
So, but they have a very good to great left tackle that they drafted in the 7th round the year before. Again, luck is important just as much as getting or
Green
investing
Bay. He went to Green Bay.
Yeah, investing in those positions. We talked about it. Jalen Reagor. They took Jalen Reagor over literally the pick before Justin Jefferson. They're not hurting for wide receiver talent. I mean,
nope.
don't get me wrong. I'm sure they'd love to have Justin Jefferson, but it's not like they're like, So even the greats, even Howie Roseman makes mistakes, but he keeps going back to the well, right? And then because the more you add guys, the more you invest, the more to those positions, the more luck you can have. And like, oh, we missed on Jalen Reagor, but we were able to trade for AJ Brown.
Well, and they keep what they do is also what the Cardinals kind of did with some success a long time ago is that they foresee future needs from their stars. Like they envisioned Javon Hargrave leaving, so they had defensive tackles. They saw Fletcher Cox. That's Jordan Davis was drafted. Jalen Carter was drafted. They foresaw Hassan Reddick leaving, so they drafted
Nolan Smith. Yeah.
Nolan Smith.
No, and you're exactly right, Jess. And again, that's why we have to have a little patience with Monty, because he came in and it was bare. I mean, there was no depth. There was no high-end talent. I mean, again, I love Trey, love Buddha, but when your best players are a tight end and a safety, you've got a long road to hoe. Yeah. And so that's to your point, right? Howie said, okay, their left tackle forever. I can't even remember who it was. He's getting up there, so we gotta be ready. And then they drafted Andre Dillard. He sucked, and so, but then this guy Jordan Mailata, holy crap, he's really good, right? And so they got away with it, and so that's just kind of it.
Peters. Jason Peters.
That's Peters. The guy. Yes, thank you. And so that's how you do it. I mean, who's the guy in Chicago now? Edwards, right? That we talked about.
Yeah, TJ Edwards.
TJ Edwards, right? TJ Edwards all pro level player for Philly under Jonathan Gannon. They draft Nakobe Dean. Everybody's going, what? Why are we taking Nakobe Dean? We have young TJ Edwards. Kaiser White is playing fantastic. And they draft Nakobe Dean, and now Nakobe Dean's the starter. And they just go pick up Zach Bond off the street. And it's like no big deal. And that's what it's and now you talk about like Jeremiah Trotter Jr., right? He's the next guy in line because they're talking about, oh, we're going to let Zach Bond go. They're letting go an all-pro linebacker, and Cardinals fans are like, oh, I think we need to re-sign, Mark. And again, we love Will Hernandez, but I think we need to re-sign Will Hernandez. Like, you can't look at what he is for the team and the community. I'm like, wait, the Super Bowl champs are letting go an all-pro, and we're like, hey, we got to retain this, guard who's been very good, but just blew out his knee. He's going to be 30. Like, it's just it. And again, they probably have to because they don't have anything.
Right.
So that's what the issue has become. Whereas when you're the Eagles and you draft well and you, as you said, prepare, all of a sudden you're like, okay, good luck, Zach. Thanks for the Super Bowl championship. Thanks for being an all-pro for us. Go get paid by the Arizona Cardinals. Go get paid by another team, $12 million a year. We're not going to pay that. And then we'll just insert Jeremiah Trotter. We'll take our lumps for a year. And then in his second year starting, his third year in the league, he'll be a force.
Yes.
It's just, that's what great organizations do. And that's how they maintain year to year.
Coming up next on the Rise of Sierra podcast, the Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's talk about some specific free agents that seem to fit some needs the Cardinals have. Let's cover next on Rise of Sierra. We're back on the Rise of Sierra podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. Free agents from the Eagles. We're not going to do this like with every team, but it was in particularly noticeable with the Eagles. And there are two names in particular all over Cardinals Twitter that guys are like, oh, we got to go. And I actually wrote about that. There are four. There are four Eagles free agents that would slide right into needs that the Cardinals drastically need. So the four guys I noted: Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, Mekhi Becton, and Zach Bond. But the two guys that everyone is talking about happen to be Sweat and Williams. And for good reason, because one, Sweat had 8 sacks during the season. They both were dominant. They combined for 4.5 sacks in the Super Bowl. Sweat looked incredible. Milton Williams was a playmaker. And could the Cardinals use more depth on the defensive line? Yes, absolutely. Do they need an edge? Absolutely. Does Josh Sweat probably fit what the Cardinals need? Probably. And he had his best season when Jonathan Gannon was his defensive coordinator back in 2022. Josh Sweat.
Career year that year.
And he had 11 sacks and over the last 4 years, 7.5, 11. Then that dipped in 2023 to 6.5. And this past year, 8. And then he didn't have any of the playoffs. He had a 2.5 in the postseason. But to me, of those two, Sweat kind of makes sense because he's already at a starter. The Cardinals have a big need at outside linebacker where he would play. Would you say that he is a match for the Cardinals?
I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously, and they need talent.
He ain't coming cheap, though. He ain't not coming cheap.
And that's what it comes down to for all of this is, and we can only go off of what projections. So PFF, I know Spot Track's everybody's favorite, but I really do think PFF does a really good job with their free agency projections. They're not, they're not always right on, but they actually have some agents and lawyers and things like that help out. And it's interesting to see what it is, because when you look at like Josh Sweat, for instance, how high would you be willing to go, right? Like, how high up would you be willing.
Is he 20 million a year? I'm like, the market might say that. I think reasonable low end is 3 years 45, 3 years 48, but
they have 3 years 54, so that's 18 million a year. Right there is probably where I would be, because I'd be fine with paying him up front, 35 million over the first 2 years, guaranteed, and then you go, okay, we'll see what you can do after that. But on the flip side, Milton Williams, he's younger by 2 years.
Yes.
He plays a bigger position of need. I think you and I would agree. But he's also going to cost.
Well, here's the thing:
3 to 4 million more a year.
He's going to be like, if you look at his year last year, he compares favorably to Justin Jones. And what did the Cardinals pay Justin Jones? $10 million a year for 3 years. Milton Williams has been a rotational guy. And now the Cardinals don't really need a starter. They need starting quality.
Right.
But I 100%, Milton Williams is looking for a Justin Jones type deal.
Well,
and
they're projecting he's going to get 20 million a year.
Holy cow. That's wild.
Yeah. So that's where, because to your point, like, this was his highest in terms of playing time in his career. He played 653 regular season snaps. That doesn't include postseason, obviously. And you go back to Jones, right? And that was less than Jones was playing in Chicago. Now, again, Jones wasn't sharing reps with Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. But so that's the question you have to ask, because Williams, obviously huge, get 2.5 sacks, forced fumble, played amazing. But one, are you capable? Because that's why he's probably going to leave Philly, because Philly can't put a rotational defensive end under a contract for, let's just even call it 60 million, even, right? 3 years, $60 million. Philly can't do that with a rotational guy, because Jordan Davis is coming up and Jalen Carter's coming up, and Jalen Carter's going to get 100 million over 4 years. So, I mean, they can't do that. So that's what you're asking yourself. You're saying, hey, I'm going to pay Milton Williams again. And this is no shot at Milton Williams, fantastic player, doing a great job, but I'm going to pay Milton Williams X that coincides with guys that are elite, right? Playing more than he does. Chris Jones. Obviously Christian Wilkins had a bad down year. And quite frankly, Christian Wilkins, DeForest Buckner, who's very good, Draymond Jones, like, all those guys are the cautionary tales of why you're like, do I want to pay this guy that's never played this much?
Honestly, like the projected 20 million, I think that's high. I think he's going to get something more like Justin Jones, that 10 million a year, or Jordan Phillips got when he got 3 years, 30 million. I think it's going to be closer to that. And even that, would he want to come to Arizona with the role that they have? Because they've got Justin Jones, they've got Bilal Nichols, they've locked them up. They had 3-year deals, and this year they're locked in. They just drafted Darius Robinson round 1. Would Milton Williams want to come to a thing? And the Cardinals couldn't pay him more than 10 million a year. And because that would push, you could at least maybe push Bilal Nichols at that 4.5 number. Well, I guess it's probably closer to 7 to a backup. But like, he's not, like, while he's fits a need they have, he doesn't fit the roster need in terms of match role and money because of what they did last year.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is this is it's a fickle market too. And so with the jump in salary cap, with the import of what just happened, I think you're going to see some outlandish figures come around, and I won't be surprised if he ends up getting 20 million a year.
Whew. Now,
to your point, I don't think I would do that.
No. What about Zach Bond? Like, the Cardinals don't. I mean, they paid Mac Wilson a decent amount, but like SpotTrack projects him of getting what, almost 10 million a year.
Yeah, about 12. So, I mean, are you willing to do, a 3-year, $30 to $40 million deal? That's what you're looking at, basically.
If Kaiser's leaving, I wouldn't mind that. Like, I think he'd be a good fit as well. And then Becton, I have more questions about, because like the dude is a behemoth, like, and something you've said a number of times about guys his size. He's 360 pounds.
Right.
And what has been his issue other than this year? It hasn't necessarily been play as it has been consistently being on the field. And like, he's built like a tackle, and he's supposed to be a really good tackle because he moves so well. But can you count on somebody who's 363 pounds to stay healthy? Because 360-pound men are not supposed to move like him. That's not supposed to happen. And I do like the ability that he could play guard, he could play tackle, and he's very strong, and he can move well enough to play inside. But I guess the time in New York, I think, has me a little bit worried. And would the Cardinals get a guy that big to play inside?
Well, and the other thing you have to remember too is that when you're talking about Philly offensive line, they probably have the best offensive line coach in the NFL. And so when you are looking at this overall, it's like, are you really, to your point, wanting to pay a guy, probably between 8 and 10 million a year for one good season? Because that's the thing, he's going to be 26, so he's probably going to look for he'll probably look between a 2 and a 4-year deal. I would guess he'd be willing to do like a 2-year $20 million deal to see if he can get a 4-year, $60 million deal coming off of that.
Yeah.
But it's, man, Eagles offensive linemen scare me, because Stoutland is literally the best guy in the NFL. And are you going to get that somewhere else?
Right. And so, well, I wouldn't be opposed to it. I'm cautious towards Becton, especially since like it was the first year he was healthy. You do it like, and he's going to be looking to get paid. So I do like any and all of those guys. Sweat, I think, would end up making the most sense because of need.
I think so, because with the need and with how the market works, if you're able to get Sweat at 20, between 18 and 20 a year, because that's outside of age, he's going to play more downs.
Yes.
Than Milton Williams. And I think you and I can agree those are the two biggest needs for the team. And so addressing it in that way, I think, would make the most sense. And the other thing is there's not a ton of guys to work with at edge. There are,
well, especially ones that are not old.
Right. Because you can go Khalil Mack or something, but there are probably 4 to 6 interior defensive linemen that I'd be like, oh yeah, I think that's a good fit for this team.
Yeah.
Whereas Sweat's really kind of, there's one other one that we'll talk about in another show.
Yeah. And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise of Sierra podcast, special Cardinals Talk on the Web. We'll see if we'll do another show this coming week. Next, we'll see what happens with next week. We'll kind of plan things out, but we will shoot for another show this next week, and then we'll see what happens, because we've got the combine coming out. We still got free agency, so we've got a little prep for that. But this wraps up episode 640. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.